work at the White House, which is a little bit of a trip to stand up here and say. I have to tell you, in all of my career, I've been in this industry now 25 years. I never thought that I'd be standing up in front of an audience like this and talking about how to use digital stuff to do things for the greater good. So I come out of the private sector. I have had my code shipped to hundreds of millions of people. I worked on Shockwave, which probably dates me in this room, but we introduced animation to the web before Shockwave. The web did not actually move. It was static text and graphics, and I was an engineer on that team. By the way, I will say that, so I am a black woman with a degree in computer science, which apparently makes me a unicorn. But I am a big fan. Yes, you can be a leader in the digital space across the board, but I'm a big fan of learning how to code at an early age, in mid-career, whenever you can. I also helped launch Hulu. I ran digital for BET, for a television network. So I come strictly out of the private sector. As of 6 months ago, I got a call from the White House, and now I work there. Turns out when the president asks you to do something, you say, yes, sir. And so I'm serving, there's a team called the US Digital Service, and I'm serving as the Chief Digital Service Officer at the US Department of Education. What I want to talk about today is a little bit of an extension of the panel we just had, right, which is talking about what digital means and how really in this day and age it's all-encompassing. And it's the undergirding for most everything that happens, right? I mean, I imagine that most of you would probably say that the field that your company that you work for is in is not necessarily technology. Maybe it's media, maybe it's sales, right? But it's all about how digital influences and impacts the new industries, or not new industries, but industries as a whole. So I want to talk a little bit about how everything is digital these days and how you can really expand that definition and that horizon and think about different ways that digital stuff applies to everything. In particular, I'll talk about what we're doing with the US Digital Service and in government. And then I'll also talk about why digital is everything, meaning that it's so important that all of us, all of the underrepresented communities, whether they are women, whether they are underrepresented minorities, also be able to take advantage and be empowered using these digital technologies. So that's what we'll talk about. So I studied computer science, and in my head, it was always like I was working on this stuff, but in my head it was kind of always make-believe, right? So if you unplugged your computer, none of my stuff did anything. And so what I now have the opportunity to do is actually make an impact on real people's lives. So I am a member, oh, look at that. That was my intro slide. So I'm a member of an organization called the US Digital Service, just to give you a really brief overview of it. It was actually founded on the same paradigm that the rescue of healthcare.gov was, which is you take a small group of private sector folks, you parachute them in to partner with an agency to see what you can actually do in a short amount of time. The way we're working on the projects are we are looking at things that are having, projects that are going to have the biggest impact on the largest number of people. So it's not a surprise that we are starting at agencies where people are literally dying for want of services. So we're at healthcare, we're at veterans. And it's not a far leap to understand why immigration, education, Department of Justice, those are all the places that we are trying to figure out what we can do and how we can help fix things. We're doing this using private sector methodologies that you guys have all heard about and kind of probably use and practice in your day-to-day. But the great thing is we're actually taking this and implementing this in government and being successful at making real change in a pretty short amount of times. So I'm going to give you just a couple of quick examples of what we've done so far. So you guys all heard about healthcare.gov, the original and probably the subsequent release of it. And you know, healthcare.gov, this is the thing where you realize that like digital can have such a profound impact, not just on kind of the American culture and life, but actually at an individual level. So healthcare, before healthcare.gov, there were 48 million people without healthcare in this country. 45,000 of them died every year just because they didn't have healthcare. So it's just a stunning number. So this rescue team kind of parachuted in. When they got there, they were 150 people who were registering per day on the website. By the time they left, 6 weeks later, it was 150,000 people. So they making some changes and tweaks about how the software would work and how it all came together literally saved people's lives. By the end of the open enrollment period, 8.1 million people had registered that year, and the projections had only been for 7 million. So I'll probably skip over how they did it, but just to give you a couple of the kind of key takeaways. When they first got there, the worst case application took 76 screens to do, and the average application took 20 minutes to complete. By the time they left, it was 9 minutes, and the worst case was 16 screens. So again, again, I'm a technologist, but this was not rocket science. These people did not come in and write a ton of code. It was really about leadership. It was about ownership and actually figuring out how to get the job done and just bringing in kind of normal practices. I'm not really going to get into some of the technical stuff, but they also saved a lot of money. So they actually built this original system, the login system, which was throwing the most errors. It cost $200 million to build and had an operating maintenance budget of $70 million a year. And the failure rate was insane. And they broke it down. They rebuilt it. They built it in 6 months. It cost $4 million to build. And at its most expensive, it's going to cost $4 million to own and operate. And that's just because the budget doesn't count much lower than that. And the error rate basically is non-existent. The project that I worked on is called College Scorecard. It was my first project. I've been in government 6 months. And so we actually did this in a really short amount of time. So college is the surest path to middle class. There are studies that show for millennials ages 25 to 32 that unemployment, if you only have a high school diploma, your unemployment rate is 12%. If you have a bachelor's degree, it's 3%. There are studies that show that a degree from a 4-year institution over the course of your lifetime will be worth $1 million more. And the one that breaks my heart the most is if you have a high school diploma, unemployment rate is 21.8%. I'm sorry, not unemployment rate, poverty. Those folks living in poverty is 21.8%. So clearly, a college degree is really important. The president wanted to make a tool, so we were getting these metrics out into students' hands, especially like the underserved communities. So first-generation college goers, low-income students, and giving them criteria so they could understand what the value was for a school that it might give to them, right? That they'd be able to afford it, that they could actually graduate, that the school would actually serve them in a way that would get them through school, and then at the end of the time, they'd actually make enough money to be able to pay back any loans that they took off. So we actually built a tool. We went out and we talked to students. I'd been in government, I think, 4 days at this point, and if you come from technology, you know that it's really all about user-centered design and figuring out what it is that you need to build, and you need to talk to the users. So I was breaking out in hives. I was like, how do I talk to students? I need to talk to students. I had just moved to DC. I didn't know anybody. I was like, where can I find some students? I need to find some students. And a friend on my, a team member actually was like, well, we can go to the mall. And I was like, oh, that's genius, where the stores are and the kids hang out. Yes, I'm old. And she was like, yeah, or we could go outside the building to the Washington Mall, which it turns out worked out really well because it was spring break and we started accosting students as they came out of the Air and Space Museum. And we got people from like Wyoming and Nebraska and Iowa. So it actually was really good. I've been learning a lot in government. We went to Anacostia High School, actually twice, at the beginning of the project and at the end of the project. We read letters to the president that people had written about going to college and what that experience was like. And so we built this tool. I have been told that it does not look like it's a government website, but it is. It was built mobile first, and we tried really hard to build something that was going to be useful to students, right? Anything that we could do to open the doors to the education for these communities was really important. We launched it from a tech build perspective in 3 months, which is not for nothing, pretty good even in the private sector. And the thing that's actually really important to me is that we built this consumer tool, but beyond that, what we actually built was an API, an application programming interface, because the most important thing was not necessarily about building a consumer-facing tool where students are going to come to ed.gov's website to look at it, but as we said at BT, which is where I used to work, is we want to get our media into the hands of our users wherever they might be looking for it, whenever they might be looking for it, on whatever device. And so the idea was to actually get this data out into the world so that the conversation could change, so that people could actually start thinking about these metrics as the important things about what you could use to go to school. So if you don't want to come to ed.gov, that's great. Here's the data, and there's tools. Actually, when we launched, there were 11 tools that actually had used the data to incorporate into their tools, and they actually are very, very specifically targeted towards the unserved communities. In fact, one of them was completely translated into Spanish. Like, it was about getting the data out there, and it's been really successful and really well received thus far. So that's one example. That's another example of how we're actually changing real people's lives for the better, hopefully. There's a few more examples around medical records interoperability for veterans. If you go from one hospital to another hospital, you should actually be able to take your medical records with you, just, just for fun. So actually, we had another person do, given Mike Brown and Eric Garner and kind of the current situation, we had a group of technologists who basically wanted to see how they could actually change community policing and how police and communities actually interact and communicate with each other. And so there was an initiative around opening up their data. And then there was another one from the State Department around, it's called MapGive, around mapping. When the Nepal earthquake happened, there's actually 2,000 volunteers who got online within 48 hours, mapped out where buildings had collapsed, where there were roads that were still workable and passable, and that's how first responders knew where to go and target first. So again, a bunch of examples of actually affecting real people's lives. And so I just want to say that, right, you can use digital in all kinds of ways, and it's not just in tech software companies. So as I started talking about in the last panel, it's really important that it not just be folks who come from privilege or lands of opportunity that actually get a chance to do this. So the White House is doing a couple of different initiatives to try to change, they call it Innovation Nation, to try to actually change the culture across the entire population of the US. So there's three things that I'll talk about really quickly. The first one is really just about maker fairs and shared spaces. So the president actually put out a call to have communities and colleges really support the idea of actually having these creative spaces, because as we talked about, different people find different ways to engage with technology and software. And so the idea is, right, your do-it-yourself of today actually becomes the made in the US of tomorrow. So actually encouraging these kind of spaces is really important. The second thing they did is actually in August of this year, there's a thing called Demo Day where they invited 30 entrepreneurs in, and they were all, it was a diverse set of entrepreneurs from either they were from geo or from ethnic background or from LGBTQ. So it was really about actually showcasing how there is a diverse set of entrepreneurs in the community, and really showcasing them and highlighting them so that other people could see them and see their examples and learn from them. And then the last one is something called Tech Hire, which is actually still underway. So today there are 500,000 jobs that are digital technology jobs. And those jobs actually pay on average 50% more than most of the private sector jobs today. And so the challenge is how do we get, those are unfilled jobs, right? So how do we get more people trained up and be able to actually fill those positions, because it not just serves the economic communities and the jobs, but it'll actually transform the country's economic status. So we've created these programs called Tech Hire, which is basically working with communities and partnerships with what are those called? Companies? So companies, as well as actually training programs, so your non-traditional ways of actually learning some of these skills, so whether they are boot camps or whether they're online courses. So actually creating, I think we're out with 21 different communities right now, actually partnering with all those, trying to bring it all together so that, and especially doing outreach so that people who are not normally coming to learn and study tech or computer science are actually participating in and becoming involved in this economy. So that's it. It is, everything is digital. Digital is everything. I think that now is a really, really critical time. I think there's a point of inflection where everybody understands that everything you do now is digital. And so I would just encourage you all to go out and change the world in whatever you can and bring along other people with you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.